Welcome to my first boat. In this channel we will show you the step-by-step restoration of our 40-foot vintage steel yacht, with the goal to someday living on it full time. When I arrived on one day of this week, the boat was gone. All that was left was my good old crooked screwdriver. But I'm just messing with you. In fact, they had moved the boat to another location before I arrived, so I actually saw it right away when arriving on the location on that day. And there she is, in all her prime. So let's take a moment to enjoy looking at her from a bit farther back for the first time in over 6 months. And we are so close to the water now. But first, let's go back to a little earlier in this week when we decided to remove the tarpaulin and let the boat get exposed to the elements. So nice to get some sunlight back in the boat. I gave it a quick wipe with a hand broom, but any further cleaning is gonna have to wait until we are on the water, most likely. Right, now that the tarpaulin is gone, we can finally start to work on the outside of the boat. First, let me show you the condition of the paint here surrounding the hull. There are a lot of large and smaller cracks, some blisters or bubbles like here. And I'm sure a lot of you are thinking that this paint has to be removed completely and that the hull has to be sandblasted, but at this point in time and at this location, this is simply not an option. So we decided to do a, you guessed it, temporary fix. The plan is to remove all the paint that has cracked and is loose, down to the bare metal, then to fill in those holes with filler paste, sand everything flush and give it a paint job. So here we go. The difficulty is that I could only guess how big of a hole I have to do. So I just went ahead and grind away further and further until there's no more visible gap between any of the different layers of paint and filler paste and the bare metal. With these huge cracks I try to guess the shape that's underneath and then just trace a line with the angle grinder and then break off the loose parts. Here's a place where, when I started to grind away the paint, there was water coming out from underneath. When I opened it up further, I unveiled some kind of a cavity underneath, where the water was probably stuck for years and years. In this shot, notice the shadow moving upwards. That gives you an indication of how time consuming this task is. Here's a look at how a relatively small crack in the surface leads to a much bigger hole once the loose paint has been removed. Alright, now let's finish up here on the starboard side. And then we put down a protective layer with Overtrol oil. This was done on a late afternoon, and now we are back on the next day after they moved the boat. Now we can also have a good look at the damage I've done the day before. Just look at how thick of a paint job they've done on this boat. Filling up these holes is gonna take several kilos of filler paste. For now, let's cover up the holes with primer. I got a new tool. A rotary sander. The first thing I'm gonna do is remove the old name. The reason I don't like the name and thus I'm not gonna keep it is that to me, growing up in a French-speaking country, caca means poop or shit. So the name Caca Joe means to me Shitty Joe. And I'm not so self-confident to be driving around on a boat that's called Shitty Anything. Now let's do the one on the port side. And then let's go ahead and remove the old paint on the port side. Starting here at the bow and slowly working ourselves towards the stern. And at this point I want to point out that the shape that these holes take in the end are determined by the shape of the damaged paint underneath. So don't you dare comment on the shape of this particular hole. And there you have it. All the bad paint is gone, the boat looks like a piece of Swiss cheese from the side, and we have a huge D engraved into the hull of our boat. From here on out it can only get better. Right, now let's move back inside, down into the engine room. Here too we have to remove some irregularities in the walls, some uneven welds and so on, in preparation for the insulation material that we are going to put in soon. At this point we're also going to remove this shelf. I'm gonna put this here to the side for now. And then it's time for a final paint job in the engine room. Now the walls and the engine room are nice and smooth. At this point I would like to introduce one of our sponsors, namely the company Armorcell, manufacturer among others of special foams used for thermal and acoustic insulation. Their main business is in the industrial sector, but many of their products also find application in the camping and boating world. Here we have a few sheets of their Arma Comfort barrier, which can be used for acoustic insulation in the engine room. I put a link in the description if you want to know more about it. It's a very compact and dense rubbery foam with a grit reinforced aluminum outer layer. The thickness ranges from 1mm to 4mm, which is the one we are using. So let's go ahead and put in the first piece. First we measure the size we need to cut, and then we cut a piece to the right size. And the stuff is self-adhesive, so all we have to do is pull out the foil and stick it into place. Here in the beginning I'm still trying to figure out what is the best way to cut it, and this is not it. And when you run into an obstacle like here, you need to cut out the right shape and somehow figure out a way how to get it on. Because while it is flexible, you can't bend it too much. Okay, by now I figured out the way that works best for me for how to cut it. I make a few marks with the knife and then use the ruler to guide me along the cut. Here we have to make room for this ventilation pipe. Here's another one. I pressed the foam against the seacock to find the right spot for where to cut the hole. We also put some in the small places here at the top. Alright, one wall is done. Actually not that difficult. When I cut a piece from the entire sheet, I apply the same method. First I make some marks, then I use the ruler to guide my cut. Alright, next let's start with this wall. Here we're gonna have some more bigger pieces. The first two were the easy ones. Here we have several obstacles which we have to watch out for. And after measuring, I cut the holes in the right place, hopefully. Yeah, it fit perfectly. I was lucky with this one. Here's another tricky one. I have to somehow get it in between those attachments for the exhaust. Here I cut out the hole for the exhaust pipe a bit too low. But that's not a problem. Functionally, this is not gonna make a difference. Right now we have 1.5 walls done. Now let's continue with the next wall. Here is the corner piece. That grey square hole there in the wall is one of the two air vents, by the way. Next, let's measure for that pipe, which is for the heater. Here I also had to cut out some parts on the corners. This one was very tricky to put in, because it's in such a tight location. Alright, the rest of this wall should be smooth sailing. Here's the other corner piece on that wall. And the other air vent. And now that wall is also done. The next piece I had to cut in two because I couldn't fit the piece as a whole. Here is another very large piece, and when they are this big, they're really heavy. Now from here on out, pretty much all the pieces are gonna be very difficult. But by this stage I'm pretty warmed up, so no problem. This one for the corner. And then we're almost done. Here now, all the walls in the engine room have been covered with noise reducing armor comfort barrier. I'm still gonna add some to the ceiling, but we'll do that at a later stage. In some areas I will need to apply some glue, because the adhesive is not that strong, so on some areas on the walls that are a bit rougher or where there's too much of an unevenness, the foam doesn't stick so well. But overall it went pretty well, and I'm really happy with the result so far. The next task is neither pleasant nor glamorous, but it has to be done. And it took place before they moved the boat. I'm talking of course about the trash that accumulated over the months underneath the boat. Pretty much everything we ever ripped out of the boat since day one is lying somewhere here. So let's throw everything into my friend's van and bring it to the nearest recycling center. And here's the first load. And while my friend and I are busy getting rid of all of this trash, I want to take a moment to thank you for your donations this past week. Sadly, I do not have the time to thank each of you personally, but rest assured that your well-doing has been received and it will have an impact on this project. As a sign of appreciation, I put a few extra musical elements in today's episode. So once again, thank you so much. And now, let's continue with the video. Alright, here's the last load of trash. In total we had to run 3 times with a full van, and there you go. Sparkling clean. Well, almost. Alright, next, let's finally finish up this hatch in the ceiling of the hull. Here I'm cutting the screws to the right size. Next I'm applying a thick layer of Sikaflex 552, which I spread out evenly with a spatula. Put the hatch on. Put a little Sikaflex into the holes for the screws. Next we put the screws in. Then we put the screw nuts on and tie them down. And then my favorite part of the job, which is to remove the excess sealant. And you may notice that I didn't even put a border of tape this time, simply because I forgot, but it turned out not to make any difference at all. And there you have it, the fourth and final hatch we had to do for this project. And I feel like this is the one that turned out the best. And that, my friends, concludes this week's video. Once again, I want to thank you for your support. I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you again in the next video.